NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says President Trump remains committed to the alliance, but only if Canada and Europe meet higher defense spending goals. Mr. Rutte says that Trump pushed for a new 5% spending target, including 3.5% for core defense and 1.5% for security-related costs. The Netherlands, Poland, and the UK have signaled support, while countries like Spain say the target is too high. And just this morning, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada will hit the defense spending target of 5% by 2035.
That's why earlier this month, Minister of Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Chief of the Defense Staff, and I unveiled Canada's plan to rebuild, rearm, and reinvest in the Canadian Armed Forces to protect, first and foremost, Canadians, to protect our interests, and also to help protect our allies. In doing so, we are reaching NATO's 2% target this year. We've arrived at this summit looking forward with a plan to help lead with new investments to build our strength. This morning, Canada, or just now, I guess it went into the afternoon, Canada and our allies agreed to a new defense investment pledge, which secures Canada's strategic and security goals. As part of that, Canada has already beginning working towards a target of 3.5% of GDP by 2035. By expanding our plan to invest in the Canadian Armed Forces, to modernize our military equipment and technology, to help build up our own defense and security industries, as well as to diversify our defense partnerships.
Mr. Rutte says that Mr. Trump spoke directly with him ahead of this week's summit, warning allies to, quote, pay their share to keep U.S. backing. For more on this, I'm now joined in studio by Dmytro Basmat, senior news editor at Kyiv Independent. So, Dmytro, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with how we should interpret President Trump's latest warning that U.S. support for NATO hinges on allies like Canada and Europe meeting higher spending targets.
Well, I mean, I think it's clear that Canada and Europe have been playing catch up in the past few years. You know, they haven't, a lot of the NATO countries have not been meeting their 2% GDP threshold like Canada, and now they're accelerating it at the last minute. And so I think it's a fair criticism. What I don't think is a fair criticism is the fact that Donald Trump is waning in his support. Some days he's talking about NATO allies reaching 5% of a GDP threshold. Other days he's talking about invading Greenland and not protecting countries if they don't pay their fair share. So I think perhaps the president is maybe talking out of two sides of his mouth on this issue, but it is true that Canada is not was not to this point investing enough in defense, and so I think that it's a very fair target to. It's an ambitious target, but a fair target to set it at 5%. 3.5% goes to core defense spending. 1.5% goes to infrastructure investments, civilian preparedness. I think that in this time where authoritarian regimes like Russia and China continue to threaten and cause aggression across the world, I think it's a very fair investment to make sure that we protect our values that we hold dear as Western democracies.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about what Trump's presidency has looked like this time opposed to the last time. So you did kind of allude to it just now. It's a lot more of threats. It started with the tariffs and then it went to NATO, and it's constantly, if you don't agree with what I want to do, I'm going to pull away, or I'm going to make it difficult for you to exist. So what would a perfect picture look like, or is it possible that NATO could exist if the U.S. decided to pull away?
Well, I think it's very difficult. I mean, the U.S. is the world's superpower, and it really polices a lot of these aggressors. We look at what's happening right now with Israel and Iran, and the United States once again targeting Iran with strikes. So obviously they do have the military might behind them. I think at this point, Canada really needs to realign its relationships. And we've kind of saw that start with its relations with the European Union. Obviously we need to rely on the United States to an extent because of the fact that they are a global superpower. They are just south of us, but we need to diversify that military effort. And I think that by moving over towards the European Union, Mark Carney is taking a right step to diversify it.
So it did happen earlier this week. Mark Carney, as again you mentioned, did take that step with the European Union and agreed to do more trade with them. You're also saying that Canada should continue to rely on the United States. But with the tariff threat that's going on right now, How difficult is that? Is it a good idea that Canada does continue to venture off and find new trading partners, or should they stay comfortable, play it safe, and stick with the United
Well,
States?
we as a country can't play into the hand of Donald Trump.
Hmm.
Who knows how much of this is a negotiating tactic versus how much of these are legitimate threats.
Hmm.
We have to remember that he has threatened to annex us as a country.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have to be prepared for whatever may be thrown at us. And by diversifying that kind of relationship, we do just that.
So I want to go back to the NATO summit because we did veer off a little bit with our Donald Trump talk, but let's talk about the Ukraine war. Since the Middle East conflict has kind of taken headlines, people in Ukraine have felt like that's taken the back burner, and not many people have wanted to talk about the war going on, or it's lost that political attention. How important do you think this summit is for the Ukraine war to bring that attention back and remind people that it's still going on?
Well, that's exactly it. I think it's a good reminder. Donald Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky held a meeting today, their third in-person meeting. And from early accounts, it seems like a positive conversation. There is indication that perhaps the U.S. will send more Patriot missiles to Ukraine for their air defense needs. So it really reinvigorates the conversation. We remember after the first round of talks that went disastrously in the Oval Office, a second round in the Vatican kind of helped ease tensions. And so this is kind of just continuing the conversation, putting Ukraine in front of the world stage again, and really putting this issue in front of Donald Trump, who has kind of stopped calling for a ceasefire. Perhaps that will reinvigorate him to call for additional ceasefires with Russia.
And has this summit sent a strong enough message of the unity and deterrence to Russia?
Perhaps not.
Mhm.
The reason I say that is because in the statement signed by all NATO countries, they do not explicitly condemn Russia. And I think that sends the wrong message here. Yes, they reaffirm their support for Ukraine, but they don't condemn Russia. And I suspect this is because of the United States' partnership and future ties, business ties that Donald Trump has touted with Russia.
Mhm.
But nonetheless, I think it sends the wrong message that we're standing by while Ukraine suffers.
And how do you assess the political will across NATO to meet this demand, the 5% target? Sorry, especially from countries like Spain, who have already spoken out very clearly that they don't think this target's realistic.
Well, I think NATO allies have a choice right now.
Mhm.
We know that Russia is a growing threat in the European continent. We know that intelligence assessments are saying that they may attack a NATO ally in the Baltics or perhaps Poland. And this is unfortunately the price we have to pay to defend our democratic values. We know it's not we'd rather be spending that money on healthcare, on growing the economy, on social infrastructure. But to defend those values, we need a strong military. And that's really what the NATO alliance is doing right now and focused on. So yes, of course, there will be pushback. There will be a review of the spending in 2029. My guess is that no country will be halfway, or perhaps very few countries will be halfway towards that goal, and will ramp up spending towards the end of it by 2035, just like they have now. I mean, we had all NATO countries just in 2025 agree to the 2% GDP threshold. So,
Yeah, but with this 5% goal that's now set, how different is that than the previous 2%? What will that look like?
I mean, it's very ambitious. It's a very strong goal. I think perhaps countries got a bit of a breath of air in that only 3.5% will go towards core defense spending, where 1.5% will go towards investment in infrastructure, civil preparedness. Getting people in the mindset that they could face aggression from a foreign neighbor. And but I do think it's an absolutely ambitious goal that will, again, likely not see significant increases in the first few years, but will likely be very back heavy in terms of.
Now, we've talked about Canada's defense and the fact that they are pretty reliant on the United States.
Right.
So, where does Canada's currently stand on defense spending, and what would it look like for Canada to realistically hit that 5% target?
It's going to be slow incremental progress. I don't
Yep.
think we should see us having significant milestones in this in the next 2 or 3 years. This is going to be a long process, and I think Mark Carney has symbolized that as well, where we're going to be spending about $150 billion annually to get to that goal. Of course, GDP will also increase in that time, so it's tough to put an exact figure as to how much we will be spending at the end of this, but nonetheless, it's going to be incremental progress.
And if allies fall short of this target, What are real world risks? Could we see the US scale back? Which, I mean, Trump has alluded to, but other than the United States, what are other realistic risks that could happen if they don't hit that target?
I think this conference, this summit, really reaffirmed that Donald Trump will be backing other NATO allies. It's just a matter of whether they actually get to that target.
Right.
And I think there is a serious risk of not being protected by the United States. Donald Trump has, himself said that. And but again, I think there are external forces like Russia that very seriously could attack a NATO ally in the next decade. And this part of this military spending increase is to make sure that we are ready for if and when that happens.
Well, Dmytro, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you for having me.